The old cabin stood at the end of a long, winding dirt road. Trees with bony, twisted branches crowded around it, their leaves rustling like whispers in the wind. Today was not just any day, it was Friday the 13th. And well, a storm was brewing. Dark clouds the color of bruises rolled across the sky, promising a night of thunder and rain. Inside the cabin, a girl named Chloe was unpacking her sleeping bag. She had bright, curious eyes and a smile that never seemed to fade, even when faced with a spooky old cabin on the spookiest day of the year. She loved adventures, and this was going to be the best one yet. Chloe hummed a happy tune as she arranged her snacks on the small wooden table. She had brought enough for everyone: potato chips, chocolate bars, and sodas. Her friends were supposed to join her for a weekend of scary stories and fun. But one by one, they had all called to cancel. "It's Friday the 13th, Chloe," her friend Maya had said over the phone, her voice trembling. "And that cabin is supposed to be haunted. My parents won't let me go." Chloe had just laughed. She didn't believe in silly superstitions or ghosts. A little rain and a spooky date couldn't scare her away from a good time. As the afternoon light began to fade, the first drops of rain splattered against the window panes. They sounded like tiny fingers tapping on the glass. Chloe lit a fire in the old stone fireplace. The flames crackled and danced, casting long, wavering shadows across the room. The shadows looked like strange, creeping creatures, stretching and shrinking on the walls. Chloe pulled a thick blanket around her shoulders and sat in a big, comfy armchair, watching the fire. She wasn't scared, not one bit. This was cozy, she told herself. It was just her, the storm, and a perfectly spooky night ahead. The wind began to howl, rattling the old wooden frame of the cabin. It sounded like a lonely wolf crying out in the deep, dark woods. Chloe ignored it, focusing on the warmth of the fire. She imagined her friends at home, probably watching TV, safe and bored. They were missing out on all the excitement. She was brave, Chloe, the girl who wasn't afraid of anything. She felt a thrill run down her spine, a mix of excitement and just a tiny, tiny bit of nervousness. But she pushed that feeling away. It was just the wind, she reminded herself. Just the storm, nothing more. The rain fell harder and harder, drumming a frantic rhythm on the cabin's metal roof. A loud clap of thunder shook the entire structure, making the windows vibrate in their frames. Chloe jumped, her heart skipping a beat. It was louder than she had expected. A moment later, a brilliant flash of lightning lit up the forest outside. For a split second, she saw the trees, their branches looking like skeletal arms reaching for the cabin. Then, just as suddenly as it came, the light was gone, plunging the world back into darkness. And then, something else happened. The single lamp in the corner of the room flickered once, twice, and then went out. Plunged into absolute blackness, Chloe's breath caught in her throat. The only light now came from the dying embers in the fireplace, which cast a weak, orange glow on the floor in front of her. The shadows deepened, becoming vast pools of ink that swallowed the corners of the room. She could no longer see the door, the windows, or the furniture. All she could hear was the pounding rain and the frantic beating of her own heart. "It's just a power outage," she whispered to herself, her voice sounding small and shaky in the sudden silence. The power always goes out in a storm. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. The cozy cabin suddenly felt like a huge, empty cavern. Every creak of the old wood, every gust of wind, sounded 10 times louder than before. She fumbled in her backpack, her fingers searching for the flashlight she knew she had packed. Where was it? Her hand brushed against a bag of chips, a book, and then finally, the cool metal casing of the flashlight. With a sigh of relief, she clicked the button. A thin, wobbly beam of light cut through the darkness. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Chloe slowly stood up, sweeping the flashlight beam around the room. The familiar space now looked strange and menacing. The old rocking chair in the corner seemed to sway slightly on its own. A coat hanging on a peg looked like a hunched figure watching her from the shadows. She knew it was just her imagination playing tricks on her, but she couldn't shake the feeling. The feeling that she was not alone. The feeling that something else was in the cabin with her, hiding just beyond the reach of her flashlight's weak beam, waiting in the suffocating darkness. Just as she was starting to calm her racing heart, she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the storm. Knock, knock, knock. It was coming from the front door. The sound was slow, deliberate, and heavy. Who could possibly be out there in this weather, in the middle of the woods? Maybe it was one of her friends playing a prank on her. Maybe they had changed their minds and decided to come after all. A flicker of hope mixed with her fear. She held her breath, listening. The wind howled, and for a moment she thought she had imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. There was no mistaking it. Someone was definitely at the door. Chloe's mind raced. Should she answer it? Her parents had always told her never to open the door to strangers. But what if it was someone who needed help? What if their car had broken down on the remote road? Her bravery warred with a growing sense of dread. The knocking was insistent, demanding. It didn't sound friendly, it sounded impatient. Clutching her flashlight tightly, Chloe crept toward the door. Her footsteps were silent on the wooden floorboards. The beam of her light shook, dancing nervously on the walls. She reached the door and pressed her ear against the cold, rough wood. She couldn't hear anything over the roar of the storm. No voice called out. There was only the pounding rain and the relentless, terrifying knocking that seemed to echo right through the door and into her bones. She decided against opening it. Instead, she would peek through the small window next to the door. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Chloe moved to the window. It was covered by a thin, dusty curtain. Her fingers trembled as she carefully pulled the edge of the fabric aside, creating a tiny gap to look through. She held the flashlight down, not wanting to reveal her position. The world outside was a swirl of rain and darkness. It was hard to see anything clearly. She squinted, her eyes straining to make sense of the shapes in the stormy night. And then, a flash of lightning illuminated the porch for a horrifying second, and she saw him. The man was tall, impossibly tall, a towering silhouette against the stormy chaos. He wore a long, dark raincoat that was slick with water, making him look like he had risen from a dark lake. His face was mostly hidden by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, but Chloe could see enough. His skin was pale, his features sharp and gaunt. But it was his eyes that made her blood run cold. They seemed to glow with a strange intensity, fixed directly on the window where she was hiding. It was as if he knew she was watching him, and in his hand, he held something that glinted in the faint light. A knife. Chloe gasped and stumbled backward, letting the curtain fall back into place. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was not a prank. This was not someone who needed help. This was a nightmare. The man with the knife was real, and he was standing right outside her door. She scrambled away from the window, her back hitting the opposite wall with a thud. Panic seized her. The cabin, which had once felt cozy, now felt like a trap. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The windows were all locked, and there was only one door. The door he was knocking on. She had to do something. She couldn't just wait for him to break in. Her eyes darted around the dimly lit room, searching for a weapon, for anything she could use to defend herself. The fire poker. It was leaning against the fireplace, its iron hook looking heavy and solid. She grabbed it, the cold metal a small comfort in her trembling hands. The knocking stopped. A heavy, dreadful silence fell over the cabin, broken only by the storm. The silence was somehow worse than the knocking. What was he doing now? Was he looking for another way in? Then a new sound, a scraping noise. It was coming from the back of the cabin. Scrap! Scrap! It was the sound of metal on glass. He was at the back window trying to pry it open. Chloe's breath hitched. She was cornered. The front door was blocked, and now he was trying to get in through the back. She had to get out. Her only chance was to make a run for it, out the front door and into the woods. It was a crazy idea. The storm was raging and the forest was a dark, confusing maze. But staying in the cabin was no longer an option. It was a cage, and the hunter was closing in. With the fire poker held tightly in one hand, Chloe made her decision. She took a deep breath, trying to silence the screams that were building in her throat. The scraping at the back window grew louder, more frantic. Soon the glass would break. She had only seconds. Tiptoeing back to the front door, she placed her hand on the cold, round doorknob. Her plan was simple. Unlock the door, throw it open, and run. Run as fast as she could into the darkness, into the trees, and not look back. She prayed the man was still at the back of the cabin. She turned the lock. The click sounded like a gunshot in the tense silence. Then she twisted the knob, pulled the heavy door inward, and burst out onto the porch. The wind and rain hit her with full force, stealing her breath and plastering her hair to her face. For a moment, she was blinded by the darkness. She risked a quick glance back toward the corner of the cabin. In the next flash of lightning, she saw him. He was no longer at the window. He was standing at the corner of the porch, turning to face her. He had been waiting for her. He took a step toward her, raising the knife. The blade seemed to drink the darkness, a sliver of terrifying light. Chloe didn't scream. She didn't have time. She leaped off the porch steps and onto the muddy ground, her sneakers sinking into the wet earth. She ran. She ran with all the strength she had, her legs pumping, her lungs burning. She didn't dare look back. She could hear his heavy footsteps splashing through the mud behind her, getting closer. The woods were just ahead, a wall of blackness promising shelter but also unknown dangers. She plunged into the trees, branches scratching at her face and arms. The rain was so heavy she could barely see a foot in front of her. She stumbled over roots and rocks, her fear giving her a strange, desperate energy. The sound of his pursuit was right behind her. A twig snapped nearby. Was it him, or just the storm? She ducked behind a massive oak tree, pressing her back against the rough bark, trying to catch her breath. She held perfectly still, listening. The sound of footsteps faded. Had she lost him? Or was he hiding too, waiting for her to make a sound? Days turned into weeks. The storm passed and the sun returned to the woods around the old cabin. But Chloe never came home. The police searched for her. Volunteers combed every inch of the forest. They found footprints in the mud near the cabin, one small set and one large one. The footprints led into the woods, and then, mysteriously, they vanished, as if the earth had swallowed them whole. They found the front door of the cabin wide open, the fire long dead, and a half-eaten chocolate bar on the table. But of Chloe, there was no sign. Her friends were heartbroken. They whispered about the curse of Friday the 13th, about the haunted cabin in the woods. They remembered Chloe's brave, smiling face and how she had laughed at their fears. Now, her laughter was just an echo. The townspeople started telling stories. Some said they saw strange lights in the woods on stormy nights. Others claimed to hear a girl crying for help on the wind. The cabin was abandoned, left to rot, a silent monument to the girl who had disappeared. The story of Chloe became a local legend, a scary tale told around campfires to frighten children. 1 year later, a group of hikers stumbled upon something strange near the old cabin. Half buried in the mud beneath a large oak tree, something was glinting in the sunlight. It was a small silver locket in the shape of a heart. It was tarnished and caked with dirt, but when they wiped it clean, they could see an initial engraved on the front, a single elegant C. No one knew how it got there. It was the last trace of Chloe ever found. The locket became part of her legend, a mysterious object left behind. And so the story of Chloe's chilling encounter is never truly over. Some say that on a stormy Friday the 13th, if you go deep into those woods and stand by the old oak tree, you can still feel a strange coldness in the air. They say the man in the dark raincoat still walks the forest, searching. And they say that sometimes, just sometimes, you can see a faint glimmer in the mud, the glimmer of a silver locket waiting for its owner to return. But she never does, because some mysteries, like the one that began on that terrible night, are never meant to be solved.